The first thing I learned about alien palaces was that they don't believe in straight lines. Walls curved as if they had opinions, floors shifted ever so slightly beneath my boots, like they were adjusting to my weight out of curiosity, and doors didn't open unless you stood in front of them with what I could only describe as emotional sincerity. I discovered that last part after 10 seconds of aggressively staring at one, which apparently translated to hostility, because it remained very much closed. Okay, I muttered, exhaling slowly, trying to look less like a man planning to fight a door. Peaceful thoughts, friendly thoughts. I am not a threat to advanced alien architecture. The door slid open immediately. Right, I said, stepping through. Good to know I've officially been judged by furniture. Behind me, two guards followed at a polite distance. They were tall, armored in something that looked grown rather than built, their faces calm and unreadable. Their ears, long, elegant, unmistakably not human, angled slightly forward, as if they were always listening to something beyond the obvious. I had tried asking them questions earlier. One of them had blinked slowly, which I chose to interpret as either respect or a warning. Probably both. I still didn't fully understand why I was here. 1 minute I had been on a routine transport assignment, simple job, nothing heroic, and the next I was standing inside a structure that felt like it had been designed by someone who thought gravity was more of a suggestion than a rule. They called me a guest, which would have been more comforting if every corridor didn't also include at least 3 ways for me to be vaporized. I turned a corner and nearly walked into a floating object that drifted across my path with the confidence of something that knew I would move first. It hovered for a moment, as if judging me, then continued on. Of course, I said quietly. Why wouldn't the chairs fly? One of the guards made a soft sound, not quite a laugh, not quite not a laugh. Encouraging. I kept walking, trying to appear calm, which mostly meant pretending I understood anything that was happening. The corridor widened into an open space where a massive window stretched from floor to ceiling. Beyond it, space unfolded in impossible clarity. Stars sharp and bright, distant ships moving like silent thoughts. For a moment I forgot about the guards, the palace, the fact that I was very likely in over my head. Then I noticed her. She was sitting near the window, small and still, legs tucked close to her body. In her hands was a device, some kind of toy, I guessed, that emitted a soft, flickering glow. It sparked faintly, then dimmed, then sparked again, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to exist. She looked human, mostly. Soft features, wide eyes, the kind of expression you'd expect from a child trying very hard not to cry. But her ears were different, long, graceful, extending slightly back, catching the light in a way that made them seem almost translucent. She didn't notice me at first. I slowed down, glancing briefly at the guards. They had stopped several steps behind me, watching, not intervening. That felt important and slightly terrifying. The girl tapped the device again. It flickered, then went dark for a full second before sputtering back to life. Her shoulders sank just a little, a quiet kind of disappointment that didn't need translation. I hesitated. There are moments where your brain tries to present options, careful, logical options. This was not one of those moments. My brain, very helpfully, offered nothing useful. Just a vague awareness that I was standing in an alien palace, observed by people who could probably disassemble me at a molecular level, considering whether or not to interact with what was very clearly a very important child. Great, I whispered to myself. No pressure. I took a step forward, her head lifted slightly, eyes shifting toward me. For a brief second, we just looked at each other. Hers curious, a little guarded. Mine, hopefully not as confused as I felt. I said, which I will admit was not my strongest opening. Hi. She didn't respond, just watched me. I crouched slowly, careful, as if sudden movements might trigger some kind of alarm system. Given everything I'd seen so far, that was not an unreasonable assumption. That thing broken? I asked, nodding toward the device. She looked down at it, then back at me, and gave the smallest possible nod. Yeah, I said, as if I had extensive experience with alien technology that definitely didn't exist where I came from. Hate when that happens. I had no idea what I was doing, which in hindsight was probably the only reason I did it. I reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull back. She didn't, so I gently placed my hand on her head, patting it once, lightly, the way you would reassure a child without making a big deal out of it. "It's okay," I said. "Things break. Doesn't mean they're done." The moment stretched. The girl froze. I froze. Behind me, I felt it more than heard it. The subtle shift of the guards, the way the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the entire palace had just collectively leaned in. "Okay," I murmured, not moving my hand. That reaction suggests I may have just done something incredibly significant or incredibly stupid. The device in her hands flickered once more, then stabilized, its glow steady and bright. She looked down at it, then back up at me, eyes wide. Not with fear, but something else. Something sharper, more aware. And somewhere deep within the walls of the palace, something unseen acknowledged what had just happened. I slowly withdrew my hand. "Well," I said quietly, forcing a small smile, "at least it's working now." No one laughed, which given the situation felt fair. The silence after I pulled my hand back lasted just long enough for me to reconsider every decision that had led me here, including a very questionable breakfast choice from 2 days ago. The girl was still looking at me, her device now glowing steadily in her hands as if it had decided to cooperate purely out of curiosity. "Good," I said softly, nodding at the device like I had personally repaired it using advanced knowledge I absolutely did not possess. "See? Totally intentional." She tilted her head, studying me with a focus that felt far too precise for someone her size. Up close, her eyes had a faint shimmer, like they were catching more light than they should. Not glowing, just aware in a way that made me feel like I was the one being examined. "Did you fix it?" she asked. Her voice was calm, clear, and unexpectedly direct. I opened my mouth, paused, then decided honesty was probably safer than inventing expertise. "No, but I did offer emotional support. Sometimes that's enough." She considered this with absolute seriousness, then nodded once as if filing it away as valuable data. Behind me, one of the guards shifted slightly. This time I was certain. There was the faintest hint of amusement there. Progress. The girl stood, small but composed, and took a step closer. Up close, the resemblance to the queen was unmistakable, not just in her features, but in the way she carried herself. Even at her age, there was something deliberate in every movement. "You are not afraid," she said. I blinked. "Oh no, I am. Very much. I've just decided to commit to it." That seemed to confuse her. Before I could clarify what I meant by that, which to be fair, I wasn't entirely sure myself, the air in the corridor shifted. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like the space itself adjusting, the subtle hum of the palace changing frequency. The lights dimmed slightly, then brightened again in a more focused pattern, guiding attention toward the far end of the hall. The guard straightened, which felt like a very bad sign for me. I turned slowly. She entered without hurry, without announcement, and yet everything about her arrival made it clear that she didn't need either. The queen moved with a kind of quiet authority that didn't demand attention. It simply assumed it. Her presence altered the space around her, not dramatically, but enough that ignoring her would have felt like ignoring gravity. Up close, she was even more striking. Her features were refined, almost familiar, but there was a precision to them that felt deliberate, as if nothing about her existed by accident. Her long ears framed her face elegantly, catching the light in subtle ways. Her armor, intricate, seamless, shifted faintly as she moved, like it was responding to her rather than simply worn by her. She stopped a few steps away and looked directly at me. I resisted the urge to wave. We stood there for a moment. The girl moved slightly closer to her, though her attention remained divided between us. The queen's gaze flicked briefly to the device in the child's hands, then back to me. "You interacted," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying just enough weight to make it clear that this was not a casual observation. "I did," I replied carefully, in what I would describe as a low-risk, high-uncertainty situation. That earned me a pause. Encouraging, I think. You initiated contact without instruction, she continued. Yes, I said. That's usually when most of my problems start. Another pause. The girl looked between us, clearly interested in the exchange. The queen stepped closer, just enough that I became very aware of the distance between us and the complete lack of anything resembling an escape plan. You were observed, she said. I nodded slowly. That does not surprise me. Your behavior was recorded, analyzed, and evaluated. Also not surprising, I added, though I would appreciate a copy of that analysis at some point, for personal growth. That earned me something subtle, not a smile, but a shift, the faintest change in her expression, as if she was acknowledging something she hadn't expected. Then she said, You passed. I blinked. I'm sorry? The father test, she clarified. I stared at her, then at the girl, then back at her. I feel like I missed several steps in that explanation, I said carefully. Possibly all of them. The girl spoke before the queen could respond. You did not hesitate, she said. You did not calculate outcomes. You acted. I nodded slowly. Yes, that is a recurring theme in my life. The queen studied me, her gaze steady. Most subjects, she said, delay. They assess risk. They consider consequence. Their actions become artificial. I gestured vaguely. And I didn't do that because you did not think, she finished. I paused. That sounds less like a compliment, I admitted. It is precisely why you succeeded. I exhaled slowly, processing that. Just to be clear, I said, the criteria for passing this test was not thinking, not overthinking, she corrected. Right, I said. Much better. The girl stepped closer again, her attention fully on me now. You made it work, she said, holding up the device. I absolutely did not, I replied, but I am willing to accept partial credit. The queen's gaze shifted briefly to the child, then back to me. The test was not about the device, she said. It was about the response. I nodded. That makes more sense. Slightly less comforting, but more sense. Silence settled again, though it felt different now. Less tense, more deliberate. Then the queen spoke once more. You will remain, she said. I blinked again. That sounded less like a suggestion. It was not. I glanced at the guards, who remained exactly where they were, which somehow made the situation feel even more official. Okay, I said slowly. Hypothetically speaking, if I had other plans, you do not. Fair point, I admitted. The girl smiled faintly, just for a moment, and for reasons I couldn't quite explain, that felt like the most significant part of all of this. I decided very quickly that you will remain was the kind of sentence that sounded simple, but carried the weight of at least 17 unspoken consequences. None of them, I suspected, involved me casually walking out of the palace and catching a ride home. Right, I said, nodding like this was a perfectly normal development. Staying, of course, love staying, big fan of staying. The queen did not react. The girl, however, seemed to approve. She stepped a little closer, her gaze fixed on me as if I had just become significantly more interesting than before, which, considering the setting, was both flattering and deeply concerning. What happens now, I asked, because asking questions felt like the only productive thing I could do that didn't involve running. The queen turned slightly, gesturing toward the corridor beyond. The walls shifted subtly in response, their surface rearranging into a smoother, more defined path. I was beginning to suspect the palace wasn't just architecture. It was participating. You will be integrated, she said. I followed her gaze. Integrated sounds official. It is. I nodded slowly. Does integration involve exams? Because I should mention in advance, I don't test well under interstellar pressure. The girl glanced up at the queen. He speaks often. Yes, the queen replied calmly. I have observed. Good, I said. At least that part is consistent. We began walking, or rather they began walking, and I followed, which seemed to be the safest available strategy. The guards fell in behind us again, silent as ever. The corridor adjusted as we moved, lighting guiding our path, surfaces shifting just enough to feel intentional. Integration into what exactly? I asked after a moment. The central system, the Queen said. I stopped. Okay, I said carefully. That sounds like something I should have a say in. You were already evaluated, she replied without turning. Your compatibility is confirmed. That's not quite the same as consent, I pointed out. She paused, slowly turned, and looked at me in a way that made me reconsider how strongly I wanted to pursue that argument. Your presence here is not incidental, she said. Our systems do not select randomly. I had a feeling about that, I admitted. Mostly because nothing about this place feels random. Even the chairs have intentions. The girl nodded seriously. They do. Of course they do, I said. Why wouldn't they? We continued walking, and I tried to focus on breathing normally, which was surprisingly difficult when every surface around you might be quietly analyzing your emotional state. So, I said, this test, the father test, that's a regular thing? It is rare, the Queen replied, and necessary. For what? For continuity. I frowned slightly. Continuity of what? The Empire. Yes, she said, and something more. That was not reassuring. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, vast and quiet, its ceiling stretching high above in a way that made it difficult to tell where it ended. At the center stood a structure unlike anything I had seen so far, tall, layered, composed of shifting geometric patterns that moved too slowly to notice at first glance. It was watching. I didn't know how else to describe it. There was no face, no eyes, but standing in front of it felt like being observed from every angle at once. Okay, I said under my breath, that's definitely not a chair. This is the central system, the Queen said. Of course it is, I replied. Why wouldn't the most important thing in the Empire look like a very calm nightmare? The girl stepped closer to it without hesitation. The patterns shifted slightly in response, as if recognizing her. You will interface here, the Queen continued. I looked at her, then at the structure, then back at her. I feel like interface is one of those words that means something very specific that I am not going to enjoy, I said. It means you will be understood, she replied. I already feel understood, I said quickly. I'm a simple man. I like food that doesn't glow and floors that don't think. The girl looked at me again. The floor does not think, she said. It judged me earlier, I replied. I could feel it. She considered that. It evaluates balance. That's what I said, I muttered. The Queen stepped closer to me, her presence shifting the air again. Not aggressively, but enough that I became very aware of my own stillness. You are resistant, she observed. I am cautious, I corrected. You acted without hesitation before. That was different, I said. That was instinct. And this is not, I hesitated. That was the problem, wasn't it? Earlier, I hadn't thought. I hadn't weighed outcomes or calculated risks. I had simply seen a child who looked like she needed something, and I had acted. No system, no analysis. Now, standing in front of something that could probably map my entire mind in a few seconds, I was thinking. A lot. Instinct works better when the worst possible outcome is social embarrassment, I said. Not whatever this is. The Queen watched me in silence. Then unexpectedly, the girl stepped forward and took my hand. It was such a simple gesture that it caught me completely off guard. You are thinking too much, she said. I blinked, looking down at her. That seems to be a recurring critique today, I admitted. She tugged gently, guiding me one step closer to the structure. The patterns shifted again, more noticeably this time, like a response to proximity. Nothing happened. No alarms. No sudden disintegration. Just awareness. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. Still here. That's a good sign. The Queen stepped beside us. This is not a test of knowledge, she said, or strength. It is a continuation. Of what? She looked at the girl, then back at me. Of what you began. I followed her gaze, then looked at the small hand still holding mine. The same instinct flickered again. Not as strong as before, not as immediate, but present. Less fear, more understanding. Right, I said quietly. No pressure, The patterns in the structure shifted once more, aligning in a way that felt almost expectant. And for the second time since arriving here, I had the distinct feeling that something important was about to happen, which based on my track record so far, meant I was probably about to do something without thinking again. I sighed softly. Okay, I said, let's try not to accidentally pass another test. The structure did not activate the way I expected. There was no flash of light, no dramatic surge of energy, no voice announcing that I had just connected to something far beyond my understanding. Instead, it did something much worse. It stayed quiet. I stood there, the girl's hand still lightly holding mine, the queen just behind us, and the massive shifting construct in front of me, simply existing. Its surface patterns flowed slowly, almost lazily, like it had all the time in the universe to decide what to do with me. Is it doing anything? I asked. It is, the queen replied. That's comforting, I said, because from my perspective, it's just watching me like I owe it money. The girl tilted her head slightly. It is reading you. Of course it is, I muttered. Why wouldn't it? I tried not to think about what reading might involve. There were too many possibilities and none of them felt particularly private. I shifted my weight slightly, resisting the urge to wave awkwardly at the structure, just to break the tension. Do I need to say something? I asked. No, the queen said. You have already said enough. That's been happening a lot today, I replied. The patterns on the structure began to change. Not faster, not more aggressive, but more focused. Lines that had been drifting aimlessly started aligning, forming shapes that almost looked intentional. For a brief moment, I thought I recognized something, an outline, a motion, but it slipped away before I could place it. I don't like how it's starting to look like it understands me, I said. It does, the girl replied simply. Right, I said. That's exactly what I was afraid of. A low hum emerged, not from the structure itself, but from the air around us. It was subtle, more felt than heard, like standing near something that vibrated just outside the range of normal perception. My skin prickled slightly. Okay, I said, glancing at the queen. If this is the part where I dissolve into energy, I would appreciate a warning. You will not dissolve, she said. That's reassuring. You said that very confidently. The girl squeezed my hand slightly. You're stable. I'm glad someone thinks so, I replied. The structure shifted again, and this time, the change was unmistakable. The flowing patterns condensed, forming a series of layered shapes that moved in sequence. Not random, not abstract, responsive. I took a slow breath. All right, I said quietly. So it's reacting. It is adapting, the queen corrected. To me? Yes. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. That feels like a lot of responsibility for someone who tripped over a floating chair earlier. You adjusted, she said. I panicked gracefully, I corrected. The hum deepened slightly, and for a brief moment, the space around us seemed to stretch. Not physically, but perceptually. Distances felt flexible. The structure in front of me no longer seemed fixed in place. It felt closer, then farther, then both at once. Okay, I said, tightening my grip slightly without realizing it. That's new. I don't love that. It is aligning with your perception, the queen said. That sounds like something that should not be possible. It is necessary. Of course it is, I muttered. The girl stepped forward again, pulling me gently with her. This time I didn't resist. Not because I was entirely comfortable, but because resisting didn't seem like it would help. As we moved closer, the patterns shifted more rapidly, but still without chaos. There was structure to it, intention. The shapes began to resemble something more defined. Not objects, not exactly, but interactions, movements, moments. And then I saw it. A brief flicker, too fast to fully grasp, but unmistakable. A small figure, sitting, holding something that flickered. I blinked. Wait, I said. Was that? Yes, the queen said. That was just now, I continued. That was the corridor. That was... It is reflecting your interaction. I stared at the structure, watching as the patterns shifted again, replaying fragments of what had just happened. Not visually, not exactly, but conceptually. It wasn't showing me an image. It was reconstructing the moment in a way that felt understood. That's, I paused. That's actually kind of impressive. The girl nodded. It learns from you. I'm not sure I'm the best source material, I said. It disagrees, the Queen replied. The hum stabilized, settling into a steady rhythm. The shifting patterns slowed slightly. No longer searching, no longer probing. Observing, accepting. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath longer than I thought. So, I said carefully, what happens now? The Queen stepped closer, her presence grounding in a way that felt almost intentional. Now, she said, it begins to integrate you into its understanding of continuity. I blinked. That sounds even more complicated than before. It means, she said, that your actions will influence its future responses. I frowned slightly. So, I'm part of the system now? In part. I looked at the structure again, then down at the girl, then back at the Queen. Does that come with instructions? I asked. No. Of course not, I said. The girl tugged on my hand again, drawing my attention back to her. Her expression had shifted, not just curiosity now, but something warmer, more certain. You are staying, she said. I looked at her for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I said quietly. I think I am. The structure pulsed once, softly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that I felt it, not around me, through me. And for the first time since arriving here, the uncertainty didn't feel quite as heavy. Still confusing, still overwhelming, but slightly less like I didn't belong. All right, I said, glancing back at the Queen. So far, I haven't broken anything. You have changed something, she replied. I paused. That sounds more important, I admitted. It is. I nodded slowly, then looked back at the structure, which had returned to its steady, flowing state. Good, I said. Let's try to keep that trend going. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of the system, it almost felt like something agreed. The chamber felt different when we stepped away from the structure, as if something subtle had shifted its attention elsewhere. I didn't know if that was comforting or unsettling, but I decided to treat it as progress. All right, I said, glancing back once more. It didn't absorb me, rewrite me, or turn me into a decorative pattern. That's a successful interaction in my book. You were never in danger, the Queen said. I appreciate that, I replied, but I feel like that's the kind of thing you say after the dangerous part. The girl walked beside me, her hands still occasionally brushing against mine, as if confirming I hadn't disappeared. She seemed more relaxed now, though her eyes kept flicking toward me with a curiosity that had evolved into something closer to certainty. You changed it, she said. I looked down at her. I'd like to clarify that I didn't mean to. That is why it worked, she replied. I sighed softly. That explanation is starting to concern me. We entered another corridor, though calling it a corridor felt inaccurate. The walls weren't just curved. They were alive with faint movement, like slow currents passing beneath a smooth surface. Light adjusted around us, not just illuminating, but reacting. When the girl moved slightly ahead, the glow followed her more closely, as if prioritizing her presence. Does everything here respond to you? I asked her. It responds to importance, she said. I glanced at the Queen. And she's very important. Yes, that tracks. The Queen walked in silence for a few steps before speaking. Your presence has altered the system's prioritization patterns. I nodded slowly. That sounds like something I should apologize for. It is not an error. Good, I said, because I wouldn't know how to fix it. We turned into a wider space where several individuals, advisors I assumed, stood in quiet discussion. They fell silent as we entered. Their attention shifted immediately, not to the Queen, but to me. That was new and deeply uncomfortable. Ah, I murmured. I see I've become a topic. One of them stepped forward, taller than the others, his expression composed but sharp. His ears angled slightly back, not aggressively, but with a tension that felt deliberate. You have interfered with the system, he said. I raised a hand slightly. I prefer the term unexpectedly participated. It sounds less like I broke something. You were not authorized. That's been a recurring issue in my life, I admitted. The advisor's gaze didn't soften. The system does not integrate anomalies without consequence. I nodded thoughtfully. That sounds serious. I would like to point out, however, that I didn't even know there was a system to interfere with. That does not change the outcome. That feels a little unfair, I said. The Queen stepped forward slightly, not blocking me, but shifting the balance of the space in a way that made the advisor pause. It has already adapted, she said calmly. That is precisely the concern, the advisor replied. I glanced between them. Just to clarify, are we discussing me like I'm not standing right here? Yes, the advisor said. Okay, I said. At least we're being honest. The girl moved closer to me again, her presence subtle but noticeable. The advisor's gaze flicked toward her, then back to me, something shifting in his expression. Not quite doubt, but something less certain than before. He is stable, she said. I blinked. That's the nicest thing anyone said about me today. The advisor studied her for a moment, then looked back at the Queen. The system reflects influence. If it has accepted him, it has, the Queen said. Silence followed. I took a small step backward, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Conversations like this felt like they could escalate into something complicated very quickly, and I had no idea what my role was supposed to be if they did. So, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking, if I were to not interfere anymore, would that help? No, the Queen said. That was immediate, I replied. I respect the clarity. You cannot withdraw what has already been introduced, she continued. I nodded slowly. Right, that makes sense. Once you accidentally become part of an advanced alien system, there's no uninstall option. The advisor's expression tightened slightly, but he didn't interrupt. What exactly did I introduce? I asked. The Queen looked at me for a moment before answering. Unpredictability, she said. I considered that. That feels accurate, I admitted. And continuity through emotional response, she added. I paused. That sounds significantly more important than the first thing. It is. The advisor exhaled slowly, his posture shifting just slightly. Not relaxed, but no longer entirely rigid. If this influence continues, he said, the system will evolve beyond its current parameters. I raised an eyebrow. Is that bad? It is unknown. Ah, I said. The most comforting category. The girl looked up at me again. Unknown is not always bad. I smiled faintly. That's a good perspective. The advisor studied us both for a moment longer, then stepped back, though not entirely conceding. More like recalibrating. The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it changed. Less sharp, more uncertain. I exhaled quietly. Well, I said, glancing at the Queen, I think I've officially complicated things. You have clarified something, she replied. I looked at her. That's a much better way to say it. The girl squeezed my hand again, just briefly. And for some reason, that small gesture felt more stabilizing than anything the system had done. I glanced around the chamber, the advisors, the shifting walls, the subtle hum of a structure I was somehow now part of, and shook my head slightly. You know, I said, when I woke up this morning, I was hoping for a quiet day. The girl tilted her head. What is quiet? I smiled. Man, I'm starting to forget, I admitted. I didn't realize I had become part of the palace until the palace started following me. Not in a dramatic way. There were no alarms, no sudden movements, no walls closing in like I had triggered something irreversible. It was subtler than that. I would turn a corner and the lighting would already be adjusted, not just to illuminate the path, but to match my pace. I would pause and the faint hum in the walls would soften, like it was giving me space to think, which for the record was not something I trusted. I think it likes you, I said quietly, glancing at the girl walking beside me. It recognizes you, she corrected. Right, I said. That's somehow more intense. She didn't seem bothered. If anything, she looked comfortable, like this level of interaction was normal. Or at least normal enough that she didn't question it. We stepped into another open chamber, smaller than the central system room, but still far larger than anything that should reasonably exist indoors. A few guards stood along the edges, their posture steady, though I noticed their attention shifted slightly when I entered. Not alarmed, not aggressive, but aware in a different way than before. "They're watching me more," I said. "They are adjusting," the girl replied. "That's a polite way to say it." I took a few steps forward, testing something. The floor beneath me responded. Not moving, not changing shape, but aligning. It felt more stable than before, like it had recalculated my balance and decided to cooperate. I stopped. "Okay," I said slowly. "That's new. It didn't do that earlier." "You were not part of it earlier," she said. I exhaled. "Of course," I murmured. "That makes perfect sense in a way that I wish it didn't." Behind us, the Queen entered the chamber without announcement, though the guards immediately shifted in subtle acknowledgement. I turned slightly, meeting her gaze. "There's been a change," I said. "There has," she replied. "I'm starting to notice." She stepped closer, her presence steady, grounded. "The system is no longer observing you as external." I nodded. "Yeah, I got that part. It's the 'what does that mean for me' part that's still unclear. It means your behavior influences immediate environmental response." I glanced around. "So if I panic, it will compensate. That's either very helpful or deeply concerning. It depends on your behavior." "Great," I said. "No pressure." The girl moved ahead of me slightly, then turned, walking backward with an ease that suggested she trusted the environment completely. The lighting followed her movement, then adjusted again as I shifted position, balancing between us. "You are learning," she said. "I'm trying not to accidentally control things," I replied. "That feels like something I shouldn't be allowed to do unsupervised." "You are supervised," the Queen said. I glanced at her. "That's reassuring, in a very official way." She didn't respond, but there was a slight shift in her expression. Not amusement, not quite, but something less rigid than before. I took another step forward, then another, paying attention this time. The environment wasn't just reacting, it was anticipating. The floor adjusted before I fully shifted my weight. The lighting changed before I turned my head. It wasn't following me, it was predicting me. "Okay," I said quietly, "that's efficient." "The system integrates patterns," the Queen said. "Your presence has introduced new variables." I feel like I should apologize to the system directly. That would not be necessary. "Good," I said, "because I wouldn't know where to start." I stopped again, looking down at my hand for a moment. The same hand that had started all of this with a simple, thoughtless gesture. "That wasn't part of the test, was it?" I asked. The Queen tilted her head slightly. "Which part?" "The part where things keep changing after I passed it." She considered that for a moment. "No," she said. "That is the result." I nodded slowly. "Right, of course it is." The girl stepped closer again, her expression thoughtful. "You changed the way it sees care." I blinked. "That sounds bigger than what I did." "It is," she said simply. I looked at the Queen. "You're both very calm about that." "It was necessary," she replied. "Was it planned?" "No." I exhaled. "That makes me feel slightly better," I admitted. "At least I didn't interrupt something important." "You became something important," she said. I paused. "That's a very heavy sentence," I said quietly. She didn't disagree. Silence settled for a moment, though it wasn't uncomfortable. Just full. Like the space itself was holding the weight of what had just been said. I shifted slightly, then tested something without thinking. I relaxed. Not physically, not entirely, but mentally. Just enough to stop trying to predict what would happen next. The environment responded immediately. The hum softened. The lighting warmed slightly. Even the air felt less tense. I blinked. "Okay," I said. "That's new." "You adjusted," the Queen said. "I stopped overthinking," I corrected. "Yes." I smiled faintly. "That's becoming a theme." The girl smiled too, just a little, and for a moment everything felt simpler. Not because I understood what was happening, but because I didn't need to. I glanced around the chamber again, the guards, the shifting surfaces, the subtle awareness woven into everything, and shook my head slightly. "You know," I said, "for a place that's constantly analyzing me, it's surprisingly patient." "It is adapting to you," the Queen said. I hope it's learning good habits, I replied. That depends on you. I nodded slowly. Right, I said. No pressure. The girl reached for my hand again, this time without hesitation. And this time, I didn't even think about it. I just let it happen. The system responded, not with a dramatic shift, not with anything obvious, but with something quieter. Stability. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was being watched. It felt like I was being included. I exhaled softly. Okay, I said. I think I'm starting to get it. The Queen looked at me. Do you? She asked. I thought about that for a moment, then shook my head. Not even a little, I admitted. The girl laughed, and somewhere in the quiet, responsive rhythm of the palace, something changed again. Just slightly, but enough that I felt it. The first time I realized the palace had stopped testing me was when nothing unusual happened. No shifting walls, no sudden adjustments, no quiet recalculations humming beneath the surface like something waiting to respond. I stood in the same corridor where, not long ago, even breathing felt like it required permission. And for once, the space simply existed. It didn't anticipate me. It didn't adapt. It didn't need to. Okay, I said softly, looking around. That's new. The girl stood beside me, her hands relaxed at her sides, her expression calm in a way I hadn't seen before. Not curious, not analyzing, just present. It is stable, she said. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I am too. That felt strange to say, not because it wasn't true, but because I hadn't expected to reach a point where it would be. Footsteps echoed lightly behind us. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew who it was. You have aligned, the Queen said. I glanced over my shoulder. She stood a few steps away, her posture unchanged, her presence just as steady as the first time I had seen her. But something about her felt different, not weaker, not softer, more open. I didn't realize that was something I was supposed to do, I said. It was not something you were supposed to do, she replied. It is something you chose to do. I considered that. I think I just stopped trying to control everything, I admitted. Turns out that helps. The girl nodded. You stopped resisting. Yeah, I said. That too. We stood there for a moment, the three of us, in a silence that no longer felt heavy or uncertain. It felt complete. I took a slow breath, then let it out. So, I said, glancing between them, what happens now? Do I get a certificate? A title? Something official that says, congratulations, you accidentally changed an alien empire? The girl smiled faintly. The Queen did not, but there was something unmistakably close to it in her eyes. You are not being assigned a role, she said. I raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. You have already defined your place. I looked around the corridor again, then back at her. And what place is that? She stepped closer, just enough that I could see the subtle shift in her expression, the way her composure remained intact, but her gaze carried something more personal now. You introduced something our system could not create on its own, she said. You acted without calculation. You influenced without intention. You remained without demand. I blinked. I feel like I should write that down, I said. That sounds important. It is, she replied. The girl stepped forward, her hand finding mine again, though this time it felt less like reassurance and more like habit. You stayed, she said. I looked down at her, then nodded. Yeah, I did. That was the simplest way to explain it. No grand reasoning, no strategic decision. I had just stayed. And somehow that had been enough. I glanced back at the Queen. And the system. Is it okay with all this? The system has adapted, she said. It no longer evaluates you. I frowned slightly. So I'm not being tested anymore? No. I exhaled, a quiet relief settling in. Good, I said, because I was starting to run out of ways to accidentally pass things. The girl laughed softly, and for the first time the Queen did smile. It was small, subtle, but unmistakably real. It does not require further tests, she said, because it has already changed. I nodded slowly. And that's Permanent? Yes. I looked down at my hand again, then at the girl, then back at the queen. That's a lot to come from one small moment, I said. The queen shook her head slightly. It was never small, she replied. I let that sit for a moment. Then I smiled, just a little. All right, I said. I guess that makes sense. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Not like something waiting to be filled. More like something that had already been completed. I took a step forward, then another, moving through the corridor without hesitation. The palace didn't adjust. It didn't need to. I had already found my place within it. The girl walked beside me. The queen followed. And for the first time since arriving here, I wasn't trying to understand what would happen next. I didn't need to. Hey, I said after a moment, glancing down at the girl. If the system doesn't test me anymore, does that mean I can finally relax? She thought about that, then nodded once. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Good, I said. Because I've been pretending to understand things for a while now, and I'm running out of confidence. She smiled. The queen didn't respond, but she didn't need to. We reached the end of the corridor where the vast window opened again to the stars beyond. The same view as before, the same endless expanse. But it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt connected. I stood there for a moment, looking out into the quiet, infinite dark. Then I shook my head lightly. You know, I said, I still don't fully understand any of this. The girl looked up at me. You do not need to, she said. I smiled faintly. Yeah,